What if the most effective way to reduce gun violence in America has almost nothing to do with guns themselves? That idea may feel uncomfortable, maybe even counterintuitive. Yet the data tells a story that most political debates completely overlook. And by the end of this video, you'll understand why some of the most powerful solutions to gun violence don't involve bans, buybacks, or sweeping new laws, yet consistently outperform many policies that have already been tried. At World Economics HQ, we don't chase headlines. We follow incentives, behavior, and systems. And when it comes to gun violence in the United States, the system behaves very differently from what most people assume. There's no denying the scale of the problem. Compared to other wealthy nations, America's homicide rate is unusually high, and firearms are involved in the majority of those deaths. That reality naturally pushes many people toward a simple conclusion: fewer guns must mean fewer murders. From a purely statistical standpoint, that logic holds true in many countries. The United States, however, is not operating under normal conditions. America is unique. There are more guns than people, deeply embedded legal protections, and a political reality in which large-scale confiscation is essentially impossible. Whether you support or oppose gun ownership, one practical question becomes unavoidable. If hundreds of millions of firearms aren't disappearing anytime soon, what can actually reduce violence right now? To answer that question, researchers stopped asking moral questions and started asking behavioral ones. For decades, public policy treated violence as a rational calculation. The assumption was that people carefully weigh costs and benefits before pulling a trigger. If that were true, harsher punishments or better economic opportunities should dramatically reduce violent crime. But the numbers never quite supported that theory. When researchers closely examined homicide data in major U.S. cities, a surprising pattern emerged. Only a small fraction of killings were driven by clear objectives like robbery, revenge, or financial gain. The overwhelming majority began with arguments, minor disputes that escalated in minutes. These were not carefully planned crimes. They were emotional explosions. That insight changed everything. If violence is mostly impulsive, then policies aimed at long-term incentives miss the most critical moment. The decision to act violently often happens within a very narrow window, sometimes just a few minutes, when emotion overwhelms logic. In that moment, traditional deterrents don't work. People aren't thinking about prison sentences or job prospects. They're reacting. That realization led to a radical shift in strategy. Instead of trying to reshape people's long-term incentives, researchers focused on interrupting those short, emotionally charged windows. One of the most striking examples came from urban environmental research. In cities filled with abandoned lots, researchers tested a deceptively simple idea. Rather than increasing policing or surveillance, they cleaned up neglected spaces. Trash was removed, grass was cut, dangerous debris disappeared. What had once been unusable land became functional community space. The results were extraordinary. Neighborhoods with restored lots experienced sharp drops in violent crime, including firearm-related incidents. Residents reported feeling safer, spending more time outdoors, and engaging more with their surroundings. Nothing about the population itself changed. No guns were taken away, yet violence fell anyway. Why? Because environment shapes behavior. Clean, active spaces increase visibility. More people outside means more informal oversight. Conflicts are more likely to be noticed and interrupted
before they spiral out of control. Violence isn't delayed. It's prevented because the emotional moment passes without escalation. This concept, often described as informal social control, turns out to be incredibly powerful. Similar effects have been observed with improved street lighting, stronger community presence, and visible guardianship. When people feel seen, tensions cool faster. But environmental change is only half the story.
The second breakthrough focused inward, on how individuals manage emotional stress during high-pressure moments. Behavioral economists and psychologists work together on interventions designed to help people slow their reactions when provoked. These programs didn't lecture about morality or rely on threats of punishment. Instead, they taught practical cognitive skills, how to pause, reinterpret intent, and regain control before acting. The impact was dramatic. Participants showed substantial reductions in violent behavior, higher engagement in school, and better long-term outcomes. Even among individuals considered at the highest risk of reoffending, violence declined significantly. What makes these findings especially remarkable isn't just their effectiveness, it's their cost. These interventions don't require massive infrastructure or endless funding. They rely on existing institutions, basic training, and structured guidance. Compared to the economic and social costs of incarceration, they're almost trivial. This leads to a difficult conclusion. Much of the public debate around violence rests on flawed assumptions. The carrot approach, reducing poverty and expanding opportunity, absolutely improves lives and reduces certain types of crime, but it has little impact on impulsive violence. The stick approach, harsher sentencing and mass incarceration, can suppress violence, but at enormous economic and human cost with diminishing returns. Neither approach targets the true engine behind most shootings: emotional escalation. That doesn't mean gun availability is irrelevant. Access to firearms increases the lethality of conflict, and the data is clear on that point. But availability alone doesn't explain why some communities with similar levels of poverty experience vastly different levels of violence. Behavior, environment, and social dynamics matter just as much. The real breakthrough comes from combining realism with behavioral insight. If guns remain widespread, then reducing violence means reducing the willingness, or the opportunity, to use them during moments of emotional overload. This isn't ideology. It's applied behavioral science. At World Economics HQ, we focus on systems that work in the real world, not theories that merely sound good in debate. The lesson here is uncomfortable, but powerful. The fastest way to reduce gun violence isn't always through sweeping national reforms. Sometimes it comes from small, targeted changes that reshape human behavior at exactly the right moment. Clean environments, visible community presence, emotional regulation skills, early interruption. These aren't slogans, they're mechanisms. And when policy aligns with how people actually behave, not how we wish they behaved, outcomes can change quickly. That's the kind of insight that doesn't just move charts and statistics. It saves lives. If this analysis challenged your assumptions, that's exactly why we do this work. Stay with World Economics HQ, where we break down the forces shaping markets, societies, and decision-making, without noise, without politics, and without illusions.